Hey guys, so we're going to move on with our inequality properties, and we're going to get to multiplication and division next. So, just follow along in your packet, and we're going to go over the rules for these. So if you see here, we have that for every real number a and b, and for c greater than 0, and that's going to be really important, guys, whether or not c is greater than 0 or less than 0. So if c is greater than 0, then if we have a is greater than b, then a times c is also going to be greater than b times c. So just let that sink in, and just, think about this logically. If you have a big value and a smaller value, and you multiply both of them by the same value, the bigger one is still going to remain bigger. So then, with the less than, it stays the same. So if we have a less than b, then a times c is going to be less than b times c. And the same logic kind of follows there. So if we're looking at our examples, here we have 4 is greater than negative 1. So 4 times 5, which is 20, is obviously going to remain greater than negative 1 times 5, which is negative 5. So then our next one here, we have negative 6 is less than 3. So if we multiply both sides by 5, we're going to have negative 6 times 5, which is negative 30, is less than 3 times 5, which is 15. So our signs are staying the same there, with the c is greater than 0. But if you look, and we come down here to, for every real number a and b, and for c less than 0, this is the most important one. So c less than 0, then if a is greater than b, AC is going to be less than BC. You see that right there. So we're flipping our sign when we're multiplying by a negative number. Okay, so and it stays same here for the less than sign. So if we have a less than b and we multiply by that negative number again, you flip the sign and you have greater than. And that's going to stay true as you see below here. It always stays true for the greater than or equal to signs and less than or equal to signs. So let's just look at an example, and this might help to start make a little sense for you guys. So I have that 4 is greater than negative 1. So if I decide to multiply both sides by negative 2, then I have 4 times negative 2. And we know that 4 times negative 2 is going to be negative 8. But then when I multiply negative 1 by negative 2, I'm going to get just 2. So see again, I'm flipping my sign, and then I have my 2 there. And that makes sense, obviously, because negative 8 is a smaller value than 2. So our sign is flipped. And then if we come over to this next example, we look at it and we have that negative 6 is less than 3. So, if we multiply both sides by negative 2, we're going to get negative 6 times negative 2, which is 12. And then we have 3 times negative 2, which is going to be negative 6. So, obviously here, once again, I'm flipping my sign to the greater than, and then I'm putting in my negative 6. And you guys can see that that's true because 12 is obviously a bigger value than negative 6. So I just can't stress to you guys enough, if you're multiplying those by those negatives, you have to flip your signs because it's going to make that original value either less than or greater than, whatever the opposite of what it originally was. And another thing to remember is to not generalize this rule for the positives too. So if you're multiplying by these positive values, keep the sign the way it is. It's only with the negatives that you're flipping. So if we go down here to division, you see that we have, for every real number a and b, and for c greater than 0, so we're going to have, if a is greater than b, then dividing will also give us the greater than sign again. So like I said, c is greater than 0, so we're not flipping the sign. We're still going to get that greater than sign when we carry out the division. The same is going to go for the less than here. If we divide by that c on both sides, it's going to remain a less than sign. So we'll look at another example for this. We have that 6 is greater than 4. So if we divide both sides by 2, we're going to get that 3 is greater than 2. So that stays the same. And then on the other side, we have that 2 is less than 8. So if we divide both sides by 2, we're going to get 1 is less than 4. So that's just like when you carry out your regular equations, you know, you're dividing by this positive value, your sign's staying the same. If it helps you guys in this situation to look at it as an equal sign, you can, but only if it's going to be that negative value or that positive value of c. So if you want to look at it that way, and then you divide both sides by 2, and you end up getting the 1 equal to 4, just remember to put your sign back in there and write out 1 less than 4. Okay, so now we're coming back down to when c is less than 0. So once again, if our c is less than 0 and it's in the negative, we have to flip the sign. So if you have a is greater than b, and you divide by a negative value on both sides, we're flipping it to less than. And the same is going to go over here. If you have the less than sign originally, and you divide by a negative, you switch that to greater. And guys, by looking at these examples, it should make sense that why this is taking place. Because if I'm taking this bigger value, and I'm dividing it by a negative number, it's going to go deeper into the negatives than what the smaller value would. So just, you know, and look at your, even after you carry out your multiplication or your division, just look at your ending numbers and see if where your sign is makes sense, and you know, maybe you can catch some mistakes that way. So let's look here at our examples. It's a little blurry for me, but I have that 6 is greater than 4, and I'm going to divide both sides by -2. So if I do 6 divided by -2, I'm going to get -3. And then if I do, well, sorry, I don't want to write my sign in yet. And then if I do, let's see, 4 divided by -2, I'm going to get -2. And I can actually do my sign because I see that originally it was greater than, and I'm dividing by a negative, so flip it to the other side there, and I have -3 is less than -2. And we know that that's true, so know that that's going to be the right answer there. Okay, so with this next one, we have that 2 is less than 8. So we're going to write that out, and then if we divide both sides by, divided by -2. So if we divide both sides by -2, I'm going to get -1, and then I'm going to flip my sign to the greater than, and then 8 divided by -2 is -4. And you know, it might even help that before you flip the sign, you carry out whatever the division or multiplication is asking for. And in that way, you know, if I did that first, and if I took that away, and I just calculated this -1, and then I calculated this -4, and I look at it, well, obviously I know -1 is going to be greater than -4. So you see my sign is flipped. So, you know, if it helps you do that way, just look at it and carry out the equation first, then you can do that. But usually if you're solving for a value of x, that might be hard to do since we don't know, you know, a specific value for x. But in this situation, it helps. So I'm going to flip to the next page, and I want to go over some examples with you guys, just so that we can, you know, get a better feel for what's going on. You can get more comfortable with what's going to happen with this multiplication and division. My first problem here, I have multiplying to solve an inequality. So I want to solve 3 is, and it's less than or equal to -3/5 x. So okay, the first thing that I like to do when I'm solving this problem is I just like to write it out myself, just so that I can get a good feel for what's going on there. And actually, when I have that less than or equal to sign, I'm going to write it this way with an equal to sign afterwards, just because I can't underline there. So then I have -3/5, 3 divided by 5, and all times x. So okay, when we look at this, we can think of it as bringing our x up top where the -3 is, so we have it all over 5. Then to get rid of that 5, we want to multiply both of our sides by 5, because that's going to help us get a step closer to x alone. So if we're multiplying both sides by 5, I have 15 less than or equal to, and then now I'm just going to have -3x, because my 5 on the other side over here is going to cancel out with the one on the bottom and the one on top. So don't forget to do that. You don't want to distribute the 5 to the top 3 too. It's going to cancel out. So now I have 15 is less than or equal to -3x. Well, okay, so in this situation, I'm going to have to divide because I want x alone. So I'm going to divide both sides by -3. Now remember, I am dividing by my negative. So what's going to happen is I'm going to have this -5 over here, and then I'm going to flip my sign. So it's greater than or equal to x. Okay? So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense to you guys. There were 2 steps there. You know, I did the multiplication and the division. If you guys are comfortable with multiplying by a reciprocal with fractions, then that's another option. But for this scenario, I did the 2 steps instead of multiplying both sides by my -5/3, since I would flip. So anyways, we're going to look down here to the bottom, and I trust that you guys can graph that, so I'm not going to do it for you here. So down here at the bottom, I have dividing to solve an inequality. So we already did a little bit of that up there, but I have that -4c, and then it is less than 24. Okay, so in this case, I'm just going to do that one step, and we see that if we have -4c less than 24, I'm going to divide both sides by -4 to get my c alone, and when that happens, I'm going to get my c, and I'm dividing by a negative, so flip the sign, and I got 24 divided by -4, I got -6. So as long as we're remembering to flip that sign, then everything should work out just fine. And I'll maybe just graph this one for you guys, just to kind of give a reminder on how to graph. So I have c greater than -6. So what I want to do is, well, it's not equal to, it's just greater than. So I'm going to put my circle open at my -6. And then it's greater than, so my line is going to go to the right. I'm going to put my arrow there to show that it keeps going. So, there's that. Okay, so if you look down here, we have a word problem. And I'm not going to go over that right now with you guys. We can work on those maybe a little bit in class tomorrow, but it's just, you know, looking at the problem and picking out your variables to make sense of it all. So if you guys can, just practice the rest of these problems on the next page if you're feeling a little shaky, and I'll entertain any questions you have in class tomorrow. So just come prepared with that, and also come prepared with, you know, your knowledge on your subtraction, your graphing, your addition, because you might see that in your opener.